Hey everybody, it's Beau Benjamin back again. Beau Benjamin Realty Group, powered by EXP. Alright, today's topic is the as-is addendum. We are going to go through it because there is so much misinformation and confusion out there. I'd like to make sure that all my clients for sure will go over it with, and just really the industry as a whole needs to get a better grasp on what this is. Why is this confusing in the first place? Mainly because of the TV shows. So most people that are watching the media and watching what they do, they term the deal as is, as though everybody's on the same page. It's going to be an as-is transaction, meaning that we're not going to worry about the condition of the home. We're just going to proceed through the transaction as though that does not matter. However, that is not what the document says, and when it comes down to brass tacks, we need to go by the document and the language. Now, I'll preface this video with, I am not a lawyer, alright? My job is not to interpret legal documentation. It is to advise my clients based on my experience and my knowledge in the real estate industry. So that is where this video is coming from. I'd always advise you to have your lawyer check over your documentation if you have any questions about it. That being said, let's go through the as-is addendum, and we're going to discuss the difference between the standard approach versus the as-is approach. Alright, so first of all, the as-is addendum would be attached to the purchase agreement. So the buyer is going to introduce this into the mix whenever they're making an offer. However, a lot of times it's preempted by the seller advertising, we want only as-is offers. When the seller says that, then the buyer's typically going to conform, because otherwise they're probably not going to get their offer accepted. So this video is why, as a seller, why do I advise my selling clients when we list their homes not to do this, not to ask for as-is? There's one huge reason we'll get to in just a second. We're just going to jump straight into the meat and potatoes of this. So in this document on line 20, item number 3, it reads as such: buyer reserves the right to have and shall order all independent inspections after acceptance of the purchase agreement. If buyer's inspections uncover, and this is bolded, any previously undisclosed defects, alright, that means that the seller didn't know about them and the seller didn't put them in the seller's disclosure. So anything that was undisclosed in the property, the buyer shall have, and there's a blank here, you fill in them out, say 7 days or 14 days are common numbers, beginning the day after acceptance of the purchase agreement to terminate this purchase agreement, in which case the earnest money that the buyer put down shall be promptly returned to the buyer, and the seller shall have no obligation to correct any such defects or to repair the property. If the buyer doesn't terminate, the agreement will continue, etc., etc. That is the meat and potatoes of this discussion. What I just read is what I call an out of the contract, right? And why is that important to a seller? Essentially, what an as-is addendum does is it allows the buyer a free pass. They're going to make the offer. If we accept the offer as a seller, they're going to have X amount of days to do their inspections and find any undisclosed defects. Well, here's the problem. I look at inspection responses or reports all the time. Almost every single home has an undisclosed defect, and that's fine. That's not saying the sellers are doing something wrong. It's just that as a homeowner, we don't go up into the attic every day. We don't go into the crawl space every day. We don't go into, and we're not foundation experts, so we may not be able to identify a crack or something in a basement foundation. There's just so many things about home ownership where the homeowner doesn't always understand what's going on inside the home, and that's fine. It's getting more and more such. A lot of times people living in their homes aren't going into the nooks and crannies of the home and don't always know what's going on. Therefore, whenever you sell as is and the buyer can exit the contract based on any previously undisclosed defect, most of the time they're going to be able to find one. Therefore, what does that do to the seller? Well, it gives the buyer a free pass essentially. So anytime they're going to fill in that blanket, as I said, it's 7 to 14 days. So anytime within the 7 to 14 days, if they find something, and they can basically just write a notice to the seller saying, due to this defect we found during our walkthrough inspections, etc., we're exiting the contract. We would like release from the contract. They're going to get back their earnest money deposit, and they're going to go on their merry way. They can use that and just basically use as an out for any reason, right? Like if they just decided they didn't like the house, they could find the undisclosed defect and get out of the contract. If they found a better house in the first 7 to 14 days of the transaction, they can reference this clause and get out of the contract. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but it's pretty black and white here that this can be utilized as a free pass for a buyer. So let's say now the seller did not list their home as is, and they're expecting normal offers. All right, in the normal purchase agreement language, it says the buyer has the right to get an inspection if they check that box, which they normally do, and they have up to so many days, again 7-14, to get those inspections done and provide a buyer's inspection response to the seller. And when the seller receives that response, the buyer has the right to request repairs, but in the purchase agreement it defines Indiana defect, and it categorizes major issues like safety of the home, uninhabitability of the home, greatly devalues the home if not immediately taken care of. Those are the reasons the buyer can request the repairs. The buyer's constrained kind of to request only these things that are defined in the contract. And then the seller, this is the key point, the seller has the opportunity to remedy those repairs and maintain the contract. All right, that is the biggest difference between as is and regular standard offer agreement. Okay, if the seller has that opportunity, then they have essentially the ability to keep that contract. After all, you're trying to sell your home, and you would like to have a little bit of control as to whether we continue with this contract and go ahead and sell it, i.e. I'll fix these things to make the home in good shape and we'll continue the transaction. However, if the buyer wanted to get out of the contract for any certain reason, this would not be a reason they could do so and take the earnest money back, essentially wasting the seller's time for 2 weeks. The buyer has to give the seller the opportunity to reasonably remedy these defects that they've found. That's the key. The seller has the opportunity. So in the as-is addendum, the buyer can just say, see you later. All right, I don't like this defect. I don't like this thing I found, so I'm out. Whereas in the normal process, the seller always has the right to decide whether they want to fix that so they can maintain the transaction and proceed forward. All right, so this is a common misunderstanding in the industry. It is typically what most people think, both buyers and sellers and most of the average consumer market. They hear as is and they say, we're not even going to look at the house, or the buyer's not going to look, they're not going to inspect, they're not going to do anything. They're just taking it as it stands there today. The seller doesn't have to fix anything. We're just move on and we're going to close on the transaction. Everything's going to be fine. And sometimes both parties intend that to be the case. But when they sign these documents and put it into a contract where they have this verbiage, then that constrains what can be done and how the contract and how the process is carried out. So while it may be perceived that it's a great idea to sell your home as is, it actually, in my opinion, my non-legal, non-lawyer opinion, it is not a good idea as a seller to sell your home as is. I would personally like to maintain the right to decide whether I fix these problems or not. If I decide not to, then the buyer can leave because of them. If I decide to fix them though, they need to proceed and continue purchasing the home as we already agreed upon. So not to waste my time as a seller. All right, so hopefully this helped. It's kind of a dry, boring topic, but it's such a big misconception in the industry that I thought it would be useful to get out what I believe is the truth behind reading these documents and interpreting Again, always check with your lawyer if you have any questions, as I'm not a legal counsel, but happy to help and happy to bring this content to you. Call me if you need anything. See you next time.